There was a boy named Arlo, who lived in a small town at the edge of a dark forest, and nobody in that town ever talked about what was inside those trees, because everyone was afraid of something they could not explain. Arlo was 12 years old, and he had messy brown hair, and eyes that were always looking for trouble, not because he was a bad kid, but because he was the kind of kid who could never sit still, and always wanted to know what was behind the next hill or inside the next locked room. He lived with his grandmother in a tiny house that smelled like old books and cinnamon, and his grandmother was a woman named Mabel, who had a voice like warm honey, and hands that were always busy knitting or cooking or fixing something around the house. Arlo never knew his parents because they had disappeared when he was only 2 years old, and whenever he asked his grandmother about them, she would get a strange look on her face and change the subject so fast that Arlo barely had time to understand what she meant. Time to notice. But he did notice. Every single time. One rainy evening in October, Arlo was sitting in the attic looking through old boxes because the power had gone out and there was nothing else to do, and he found something that made his heart beat faster than it ever had before. It was a photograph, old and yellow around the edges, and in the photograph there were 2 people standing in front of a door that Arlo had never seen before, and the 2 people were smiling and holding a baby, and Arlo knew right away that the baby was him and the 2 people were his parents. But it was the door behind them that caught his attention more than anything else. The door was enormous and made of dark wood, and it had strange symbols carved all over it. Symbols that looked like they were from some ancient language that nobody spoke anymore. And the door seemed to glow with a faint blue light, even in the old photograph. Arlo turned the photograph over, and on the back someone had written in small, neat handwriting the words, "The Forgotten Door, Do Not Open." He stared at those words for a long time, while the rain hammered against the attic window, and the wind howled through the cracks in the old house, and he felt something stirring inside his chest, something that was part excitement and part fear and part something else he could not name. He took the photograph and went downstairs to find his grandmother, who was sitting by the fireplace knitting a scarf that was already longer than Arlo was tall. "Grandma," he said, and he held out the photograph. "What is this door, and where are my parents?" Mabel looked at the photograph, and her face went white. So white that Arlo thought she might faint right there in her rocking chair, and her knitting needles stopped moving for the first time Arlo could ever remember. "Where did you find that?" she whispered. "In the attic," Arlo said, "in one of the old boxes." Put down her knitting, and took the photograph from his hands, and looked at it for a long time without saying anything, and Arlo could see that her hands were shaking. "Sit down, Arlo," she said finally, and her voice was different now, heavier somehow, like she was carrying something she had been trying to put down for a very long time. Arlo sat on the floor next to her chair and waited. "Your parents were not ordinary people," Mabel began, and she spoke slowly, like she was choosing every word very carefully. "They were researchers, explorers of things that most people do not believe exist. And they spent their whole lives looking for something that everyone else said was just a fairy tale." Felt the hair on the back of his neck stand up. "They found it," Mabel continued. "After years of searching, they actually found it, deep in the forest outside this town. And they were so happy and so excited that they did something foolish." "What did they do?" "They opened it," Mabel said, and a tear rolled down her wrinkled cheek. "They opened the door, and they went through it, and they never came back." The room was so quiet that Arlo could hear the fire crackling and the clock ticking, and his own heart pounding in his ears. "Why did nobody go after them?" he asked. "People tried," Mabel said. "Brave people from this town went into the forest to find the door and bring your parents back. But something strange had happened. The door had vanished, disappeared like it had never been there at all, and no matter how hard anyone searched, they could never find it again. Arlo looked at the photograph in his grandmother's trembling hands, and he made a decision right then and there. Sitting on the floor of that old house, while the storm raged outside, he was going to find that door. He was going to find his parents. He did not tell his grandmother this, because he knew she would try to stop him, and he did not blame her for that, because she loved him, and she was scared of losing him, the same way she had lost her own child. But Arlo had spent his whole life wondering about his parents, wondering if they were alive somewhere, waiting for someone to come find them, wondering if they thought about him the way he thought about them every single night before he fell asleep. The next morning the storm had passed, and the sun was shining, and everything looked fresh and clean, the way it always does after a big rain. And Arlo ate his breakfast, and kissed his grandmother on the cheek, and told her he was going to play in the fields behind the house. Instead, he walked straight toward the forest. The trees were tall and old, and their branches reached toward the sky like bony fingers. And the deeper Arlo walked, the darker it became, until the sunlight was just thin golden threads filtering through the leaves above. He had no map and no plan, and no idea where he was going, but something inside him was pulling him forward like an invisible rope tied around his chest, and he followed that feeling because it was the only thing he had. After walking for what felt like hours, he came to a clearing he had never seen before, and in the middle of that clearing there was a stone wall covered in moss and vines, and in the middle of that wall there was something that made Arlo stop breathing. It was a door, an enormous door made of dark wood with strange symbols carved all over it. Symbols that glowed with a faint blue light, exactly like the door in the photograph. Arlo had found the forgotten door. He stood there staring at it, and his whole body was trembling, but from the overwhelming feeling that his life was about to change forever, and that once he took the next step, there would be no going back. He reached out his hand and touched the door, and it was warm, impossibly warm, like it was alive, and the symbols began to glow brighter and brighter, until the whole clearing was filled with blue light. And then the door began to open. The door swung open with a deep groaning sound like the earth itself was yawning, and a blast of warm air hit Arlo's face, carrying with it the smell of flowers he had never smelled before, and the sound of distant music that was unlike anything he had ever heard. He stood at the threshold and looked through the doorway, and what he saw on the other side made him forget every fear he had ever felt in his life. It was a world of impossible colors. The sky was not blue like the sky he knew, but a deep, shimmering purple that seemed to pulse and breathe like a living thing. The trees were not green, but silver, with leaves that chimed like tiny bells when the wind blew through them. And the grass beneath was soft and golden, like a carpet made of sunlight. Arlo took a deep breath and stepped through the door. The moment his feet touched the golden grass, the door behind him slammed shut with a sound that echoed across the strange landscape. And when he turned, around the door was gone, vanished into thin air, just like his grandmother had said it would. A wave of panic washed over him, but he pushed it down, because panicking would not help him find his parents, and it would not help him find his way home. He started walking. The world around him was beautiful, but it was also strange in ways that made him uneasy, because the shadows moved on their own, even when there was nothing to cast them, and the flowers turned to watch him as he passed, like tiny colorful eyes following his every step. After a while he heard a voice, small and scratchy like someone talking through a mouthful of sand. "You should not be here." Arlo spun around and saw a creature sitting on a low branch of one of the silver trees, and the creature was about the size of a cat, but it looked nothing like any cat Arlo had ever seen. It had big round eyes that were completely black, like pools of ink, and its body was covered in soft gray fur that seemed to shimmer and change color, depending on how the light hit it. And it had long, pointed ears, and a tail that was twice as long as its body. "Who are you?" Arlo asked, trying very hard to keep his voice steady. "The better question is, who are you, and why have you come through the forgotten door?" the creature said, tilting its head to one side in a way that would have been cute if its eyes were not so dark and unreadable. "My name is Arlo, and I am looking for my parents," he said. "They came through this door 10 years ago, and they never came back." The creature's ears perked up, and it leaned forward on the branch. "You are the child of the Seekers," it said, and its voice had changed from suspicious to something that sounded almost like respect. "We have been waiting for you." "Waiting for me?" Arlo repeated. "Who is we, and how do you know about my parents?" The creature jumped down from the branch and landed on the golden grass without making a sound. "My name is Pip," the creature said, "and I am what the people of this world call a whisperer, because I can hear things that others cannot. I can hear the secrets that the wind carries, and the stories that the trees tell each other when they think nobody is listening." "That sounds made up," Arlo said. Pip made a sound that might have been a laugh. "Everything sounds made up until you see it with your own eyes," Pip said. "Now follow me, because this place where you are standing is not safe, especially not for someone who came through the forgotten door." "Why is it not safe?" Arlo asked. "Because the Shadow King knows when the door opens," Pip said, and the creature's fur turned a darker shade of gray as it spoke those words. "He always knows, and he will send his hunters to find whoever came through." "The Shadow King," Arlo said, and he felt that familiar chill running down his spine. "He is the one who rules the dark parts of this world," Pip explained as they walked quickly through the silver forest. "And he is the one who trapped your parents." Arlo stopped walking. "My parents are alive," he said, and it was not a question, but a statement filled with so much hope that it made Pip stop and look back at him with those strange black eyes. "They are alive," Pip confirmed, "but they are prisoners in the Shadow King's fortress, a place called the Hollow, deep in the heart of the Darklands, on the far side of this world." "Then that is where I am going," Arlo said. "You cannot just walk into the Hollow," Pip said, and the creature sounded genuinely worried. "The Shadow King is powerful beyond anything you can imagine. He controls the shadows themselves. He can make darkness into a weapon. He can turn your own fears against you." "I do not care," Arlo said, and he meant it with every fiber of his being. "Those are my parents, and I have spent my whole life without them, and I am not going to let him keep them. To leave them in some dungeon when I finally know they are alive." Pip stared at him for a long moment, and then nodded slowly. "You are brave like they were," Pip said. "Or maybe you are foolish like they were. I have not decided yet. But either way I will help you, because I made a promise to your mother." "You knew my mother?" Arlo whispered. "She was kind to me when she first arrived in this world," Pip said. "She was the first human who ever treated me like I mattered. And before the Shadow King's hunters took her and your father away, she asked me to watch for the door, to wait for the day when someone else might come through, and to help them if they did." Arlo felt tears burning in his eyes, but he blinked them away, because there was no time for crying. Not now, not when his parents were out there somewhere waiting. "Thank you, Pip," he said. "Do not thank me yet," Pip said. "The journey to the Hollow will take us through the Whispering Swamp and over the Glass Mountains and across the burning plains. And each of those places has dangers that would make a grown man turn around and run home." "I do not have a home to run to," Arlo said. "The door disappeared behind me." Pip's ears drooped. "Yes," the creature said quietly. "The door only opens from one side. That is the trick of it, the cruelty of it. To come here is easy, but to go back you need something special." "What do you need?" Arlo asked. "A key," Pip said. "A key made of starlight and shadow woven together. And there is only one person in this entire world who has that key." "Let me guess," Arlo said. "The Shadow King." You are smarter than you look, Pip said. So the path was clear, even if it was terrifying. Arlo had to reach the hollow and face the Shadow King, not only to rescue his parents, but also to find the key that would let them all go home. They walked through the silver forest as the purple sky slowly darkened into something that looked like deep violet velvet scattered with stars that were bigger and brighter than any stars Arlo had ever seen. And the silver leaves above them chimed their strange, beautiful music. Pip led him to a small cave hidden behind a waterfall that flowed with water that glowed pale green in the darkness. We will rest here tonight, Pip said, and tomorrow we begin the real journey. Arlo sat in the cave and looked out through the curtain of glowing water at this impossible world he had stumbled into, and he thought about his grandmother back home, who must be worrying about him by now, and he thought about his parents who were somewhere far away in the darkness. Pip, he said, what is the Shadow King afraid of? The creature looked at him with surprise. Nobody has ever asked me that before, Pip said. Everything is afraid of something, Arlo said, even the scariest things. Pip was quiet for a long time, shifted through several different colors before it finally spoke. Light, Pip whispered. The Shadow King is afraid of light, but not just any light. He is afraid of the light that comes from inside a person, the light that burns when someone refuses to give up, even when everything seems hopeless. Arlo lay down on the soft moss that covered the cave floor and closed his eyes. Then he should be very afraid of me, he said, because I am never giving up. And somewhere far across that strange world, in a fortress made of solid darkness, a figure sitting on a throne of shadows suddenly felt cold for the first time in 1,000 years. Morning came to that strange world, not with a sunrise, but with the purple sky slowly turning lighter, until it was almost lavender, and the silver trees began to hum with a low, gentle sound that was like the whole forest was waking up and stretching. Arlo opened his eyes, and for a moment he did not remember where he was, and then it all came rushing back, like cold water splashing on his face. The door, the strange world, Pip, the Shadow King, his parents trapped in a fortress of darkness. He sat up and found Pip already awake, sitting at the mouth of the cave, grooming its long tail with tiny, careful movements. You talk in your sleep, Pip said without looking up. You kept saying the word home over and over. Sorry, Arlo said. Do not be sorry, Pip replied. It tells me that you have something worth fighting for, and that is more important than any weapon or shield. They ate a breakfast of strange fruit that Pip found growing on the cave walls. Purple things that tasted like a mix of strawberries and honey and something Arlo could not identify but liked very much. And then they set out on their journey. The first challenge was the Whispering Swamp. They reached it after walking for half a day through the silver forest. And Arlo knew they had arrived because the silver trees suddenly stopped, and the ground beneath his feet turned soft and wet, and the air became thick and warm like breathing through a wet blanket. The swamp stretched out in front of them, for as far as Arlo could see, a vast expanse of dark water and twisted trees, with roots that stuck up out of the mud like gnarled fingers. And a pale mist hung over everything, making it impossible to see more than a few steps ahead. Why do they call it the Whispering Swamp? Arlo asked, though he had a feeling he already knew the answer. Listen, Pip said. Arlo listened, and at first he heard nothing, but then slowly he began to hear them. Whispers coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. Hundreds of voices speaking just below the level where he could make out the words. Like being in a crowded room where everyone was talking at the same time. What are they saying? Arlo asked. They are saying whatever you are most afraid to hear, Pip said. And the creature's black eyes looked even darker than usual. The swamp feeds on fear. It reads your mind and finds the thoughts you have buried deepest, and it speaks them out loud to try to break you. That sounds terrible, Arlo said. It is terrible, Pip agreed, Many travelers have walked into this swamp and never walked out because they heard something they could not bear, and they simply sat down in the mud and gave up. "How do we get through?" Arlo asked. "You must not listen," Pip said. "No matter what the voices say, no matter how real they sound, you must keep walking, and you must not stop. If you stop, the swamp will swallow." "You?" Arlo swallowed hard and nodded. They stepped into the swamp, and immediately the whispers grew louder, and Arlo could start to make out words among the noise. "They forgot about you," a voice hissed near his ear. "Your parents left you on purpose because they did not want you." Arlo gritted his teeth and kept walking, the muddy water reaching up to his knees. "You are just a stupid boy," another voice said from somewhere to his left. "You cannot save anyone. You cannot even save yourself." "Keep walking," Pip said from somewhere ahead, the creature hopping from root to stay above the water. "Your grandmother is glad you are gone," the swamp whispered. "She was tired of taking care of you, tired of looking at you and being reminded of the children she lost." That one hurt. It hurt so badly that Arlo actually stumbled and had to grab onto a root to keep from falling face first into the dark water, because somewhere, deep down, in a place he never liked to visit there, was a tiny part of him that had always wondered if he was a burden to his grandmother. "That is not true," he said out loud, and his voice sounded small and thin against the chorus of whispers. "How do you know?" the swamp asked, and it sounded almost gentle now, almost kind, which made it even more dangerous. "How do you know she did not send you into the forest, hoping you would find the door and disappear just like your parents did?" "Because she loves me," Arlo said, and he said it louder this time. "She loves me, and she knits scarves that are too long, and she makes cinnamon toast every morning, and she always leaves the light on for me when I am out late, and that is how I know." The whispers seemed to pull back for a moment, like they had been stung, and Arlo used that moment to push forward through the thick mud and the dark water. But the swamp was not finished with him. "Your parents are already dead, and this one was cold and flat and terrifying in its certainty. Pip is lying to you. The Shadow King killed them years ago, and you are walking toward your death for nothing." Arlo felt his legs go weak, and he looked at Pip, who was several steps ahead. "Is that true?" he asked, and he hated how scared his voice sounded. "The swamp lies," Pip said firmly. "That is what it does. It takes your fears and it makes them into words, and it tries to convince you they are real. Do not listen. Just walk." So Arlo walked. He walked through water that was sometimes up to his waist, and he walked past trees that seemed to reach for him with their twisted branches, and he walked through air so thick with whispers that he could barely hear his own thoughts. The voices told him he was worthless and alone and stupid and doomed, and they told him that nobody was coming to help him, and that the world he came from had already forgotten he existed, about himself that he had never told anyone, secret fears and private doubts and midnight thoughts that he kept locked away in the deepest part of his heart. He kept walking. He kept walking because every step was a step closer to his parents, and he kept walking because Pip was ahead of him, counting on him, and he kept walking because somewhere back in his world there was an old woman in a rocking chair who loved him and who was waiting for him to come home. And then suddenly the ground beneath his feet became firm, and the air became clear, and the whispers faded away like smoke in a strong wind. And Arlo realized he was standing on the other side of the swamp, on solid ground, under the purple sky. He collapsed onto his knees and breathed, and his whole body was shaking. Pip came and sat next to him, and the creature's fur had turned a soft, warm gold color that Arlo had not seen before. "You did well," Pip said quietly. "Most people do not make it through the whispering swamp, and those who do are never the same afterward." "I feel the same," Arlo said. "Then you are stronger than you know," Pip said. They rested for a while, and Arlo tried not to think about the things the swamp had said to him, tried to shake off the cold feeling those whispers had left behind, like a stain on his soul. When he felt ready, they continued walking, and soon the landscape began to change. The flat ground gave way to rocky terrain that angled upward, and in the distance, Arlo could see something that took his breath away. Mountains, enormous mountains that reached so high their peaks disappeared into the purple sky. And they were not made of rock, or earth, or snow. They were made of glass. The glass mountains sparkled and shimmered in the light, transparent and beautiful, and absolutely terrifying because Arlo could see straight through them, could see the other side, like looking through a window, were so steep and smooth that climbing them seemed completely impossible. "Please tell me there is a path around them," Arlo said. "There is not," Pip said. "Please tell me there is a tunnel through them." "There is not," Pip said. Arlo looked at the impossible glass mountains, and then he looked at his own small hands, and he felt something that surprised him. Not fear, and not despair, but a strange kind of determination that burned in his chest like a small bright flame. "Then we climb," he said. "Then we climb," Pip agreed, and the creature's fur turned a deep, brave red that looked like fire. They walked toward the glass mountains as the sky above them slowly darkened toward night, and Arlo could see his own reflection in the transparent surface, getting closer and closer. A small boy with messy hair and muddy clothes, and eyes that burned with a light the Shadow King would have recognized and feared. Because it was the light that Pip had talked about. The light that comes from inside a person who refuses to give up, even when everything seems hopeless. And that light was only getting brighter. The glass mountains were even more terrifying up close than they had been from a distance. And Arlo stood at the base of the first mountain with his neck craned all the way back, looking up at a wall of perfectly smooth, transparent glass that seemed to go up forever and ever, until it vanished into the purple clouds. He could see through the mountain like it was a giant window, and on the other side he could see the land that lay beyond, a flat red plain that stretched to the horizon, where a dark shape sat like a bruise against the sky. And Arlo knew without asking that the dark shape was the Hollow, the Shadow King's fortress. His parents were in there. "The glass is not ordinary glass," Pip said, and the creature was sitting on Arlo's shoulder now, because the rocky ground at the base of the mountain was sharp and cold. "It was made by the first ones, the people who built this world long before anyone can remember, and it has properties that regular glass does not." "What kind of properties?" Arlo asked. "It responds to touch," Pip said, "but only the right kind of touch. If you try to climb it with force or anger, the glass becomes as slippery as ice, and you will fall. But if you climb it with patience and kindness, the glass will warm under your hands, and small holes will appear for your fingers and toes." "You are telling me I have to climb a mountain by being nice to it?" Arlo said. "I am telling you that this world is different from yours," Pip said. "In your world, strength and force can solve many problems. But in this world, the rules are different. Here your heart matters more than your muscles." Arlo took a deep breath and placed his hands flat against the glass surface. It was cold at first, so cold it almost burned, and his instinct was to pull back, but he did not. He kept his hands pressed against the glass, and he thought about why he was here, not about his anger at the Shadow King or his frustration at being small and alone in a strange world, but about his love for his parents and his grandmother, and about the hope that had carried him this far. The glass began to warm under his palms, slowly at first, and then faster, and Arlo watched in amazement as the perfectly smooth surface began to shift and change right where his hands were touching it, tiny indentations forming in the glass just big enough for his fingers to grip. "It is working," he whispered. "Climb," Pip said, "and whatever you do, do not let fear into your heart. The mountain can feel what you feel, and if you become afraid, the holds will disappear. So Arlo began to climb the glass mountain, with Pip clinging to his shoulder, and it was the hardest thing he had ever done in his life. Not because of the physical effort, but because of the mental effort required to keep his heart calm and his thoughts positive, while climbing a wall of glass hundreds of feet above the ground. Every time, flicker of fear crept into his mind. He felt the handholds begin to smooth out and his fingers start to slip. And he would have to stop and breathe and think about something good, like the smell of his grandmother's cinnamon toast, or the sound of rain on the attic window, or the warmth of sitting by the fire on a cold winter night. And every time he found that warmth inside himself, the glass responded, and the holds came back solid and sure beneath his fingers. He climbed for hours. The world below grew smaller and smaller, and the air grew thin and cold, and his arms and legs burned with exhaustion. But he kept going, because the alternative was falling, and the alternative to that was never seeing his parents again. About halfway up, something happened that nearly destroyed him. He looked down. It was an accident. He simply turned his head at the wrong moment, and suddenly he could see how impossibly high he was, hundreds and hundreds of feet above the ground, with nothing below him but empty air and hard rock. And the fear hit him like a fist to the stomach. The handholds disappeared instantly. His fingers scraped against smooth glass, and he began to slide, slowly at first, and then faster. And Pip screamed and dug its tiny claws into his shoulder, and Arlo's mind went completely blank with terror. "Arlo," Pip shouted, "you have to stop. You have to think. Remember why you are here." But the fear was too big and too loud, and it filled every corner of his mind, like dark water flooding a room. He slid faster, and the glass was cold and smooth and merciless, and the ground was rushing up toward him. And then in that moment of absolute terror, Arlo heard something, not with his ears, but with his heart, a voice he had not heard in 10 years, but somehow recognized instantly. "Be brave, little one." It was his mother's voice. He did not know how it was possible, and he did not care. Voice cut through his fear, like sunlight cutting through a storm cloud, and he slammed his hands against the glass and thought about her. Thought about the photograph of 2 smiling people holding a baby. Thought about a woman who had asked a tiny creature to wait by a door for years and years, just in case her son came looking for her. The glass warmed and the holds appeared, and Arlo stopped sliding. He hung there for a moment, breathing hard with tears streaming down his face, and then he began to climb again. And this time he did not look down, not once, not even when the wind picked up and tried to pull him off the mountain like an invisible hand. He climbed until his hands bled and his muscles screamed, and the purple sky was so close he felt like he could reach out and touch it. And then suddenly there was no more glass above him, and he was pulling himself over the top of the mountain and collapsing on a flat glass plateau that sparkled like a field of diamonds. He lay on his back and laughed and cried at the same time, because he had done it. He had actually done it. "Your mother spoke to you," Pip said quietly, and the creature was sitting on his chest, looking at him with those black eyes that seemed less dark now, almost warm. "How?" Arlo asked. "The glass mountains carry echoes," Pip said, "echoes of everyone who has ever crossed them. Your parents climbed these same mountains 10 years ago when they were exploring this world before the Shadow King captured them. And the glass remembers their voices, their hopes, their love for you." Arlo sat up and looked out from the top of the mountain, and the view was staggering. He could see the entire world spread out below him, the silver forest behind him, the whispering swamp like a dark smudge, and ahead the burning plains, stretching out red and flat and shimmering with heat toward the dark mass of the hollow on the horizon. He said, "Distance is tricky in this world," Pip said. "Things that look close can be far away, and things that look far can be reached in a single step. It depends on what the world wants." "What does the world want?" Arlo asked. I think, Pip said slowly, the world wants what it has always wanted. For someone to challenge the Shadow King. For someone to bring light back to the places where he has spread his darkness. They found a path down the other side of the mountain that was much easier than the climb up. A spiraling staircase carved into the glass that wound down and down until it deposited them on the edge of the burning plains. The plains were exactly what they sounded like, a vast flat desert of red cracked earth where the air shimmered with heat so intense that Arlo could feel it on his face like standing too close to an open oven. The burning plains are not actually on fire, Pip explained, but the ground holds the heat of 1,000 suns, and the air above it can cook an egg in seconds. Then how do we cross? Arlo asked. There are cool spots, Pip said, places where underground streams flow beneath the surface and keep the ground cold enough to walk on. But they move and shift constantly, so we have to be quick and we have to trust my ears. Your ears? I can hear the water flowing underground, Pip said. I am a whisperer, remember? I can hear things others cannot. So they set out across the burning plains, with Pip perched on Arlo's shoulder, calling out directions like a tiny furry navigator. Left, now right, stop, wait, now forward quickly, 3 steps to the left. And Arlo followed every instruction without hesitation, because he trusted Pip completely. And the ground beneath his feet was cool, while just inches away, the red earth radiated heat so fierce it made the air wobble and dance. They crossed the plains in this strange zigzagging fashion, and with every step, the dark shape of the hollow grew larger and more detailed on the horizon, and Arlo could begin to make out towers and walls and gates, all made of something that was blacker than black, a darkness so deep it seemed to swallow the light around it. By the time they reached the other side of the plains, the hollow filled the entire sky in front of them, and standing at its base, looking up at those impossible walls of solid shadow, Arlo felt very small and very young and very far from home. But he also felt ready. Tomorrow, he said, we go in. Pip looked up at the fortress, and its fur cycled through every color Arlo had seen so far, before settling on a fierce, bright white. Tomorrow, Pip agreed, we end this. The hollow was not like any building Arlo had ever seen, because it was not really a building at all. It was more like a wound in the world, a place where light went to die, and hope went to be forgotten. And as Arlo stood before its gates, he could feel the darkness pressing against him like a physical weight trying to push him back. The gates were made of shadows so thick it looked solid, and they rose higher than the tallest trees in the silver forest, and carved into them were images that Arlo did not want to look at too closely, because they seemed to move and writhe when he was not looking directly at them. How do we get in? Arlo whispered. You walk in, Pip said, and the creature's voice was barely audible. The Shadow King does not lock his gates, because he does not believe anyone would be foolish enough to enter. Lucky for us, I am exactly that foolish, Arlo said. He reached out and pushed against the shadow gates, and they gave way like pushing through mist, through thick fog, cold and damp and clinging. And then he was through and standing inside the hollow. The inside was a vast empty space that seemed to stretch in every direction forever, like being inside a dark bubble with no walls and no ceiling and no floor, even though Arlo could feel something solid beneath his feet. And the only light came from small, flickering flames that floated in the air like trapped fireflies, giving off just enough glow to see a few feet ahead. Where are the prisoners kept? Arlo asked. Deep in the heart, Pip said. Follow the cold. In a place made of darkness, the coldest spot is always the center. They walked through the hollow, and the deeper they went, the colder it became, until Arlo could see his own breath forming little clouds in front of his face, and the floating flames grew fewer and farther between, until they were walking in near total darkness, with only Pip's faintly glowing fur to guide them. A woman's voice singing softly in the darkness, a lullaby that Arlo had never heard before, but that felt as familiar as his own heartbeat. And the sound of it made something inside his chest crack open like an egg, and warmth poured out, flooding his entire body. "That is her," he breathed. "That is my mother." He began to run toward the sound, stumbling through the darkness with his arms outstretched, and Pip held on tight to his shoulder, shouting at him to slow down, to be careful. But Arlo could not slow down, because he had waited 12 years to hear that voice, and nothing in this world or any other was going to stop him from reaching it. He burst through a curtain of shadow and found himself in a small chamber lit by a single pale flame. And there, sitting on the cold, dark floor, were two people. A woman with long, dark hair and tired eyes that widened when she saw him, and a man with messy brown hair, just like Arlo's, who jumped to his feet. So fast, he nearly fell over. "Arlo," the woman said, and she said his name like it was the most precious word in any language. "Oh, my boy, my beautiful boy." "Mom," Arlo said, and then he was running and she was running, and they crashed into each other, and his father's arms wrapped around both of them. And for a moment the darkness did not matter, and the Shadow King did not matter, and nothing existed except this family holding each other for the first time in 10 years. They were all crying and laughing and trying to talk at the same time, and Arlo's mother was touching his face like she could not believe he was real. And his father kept saying, "You found us. You actually found us," over and over like a prayer. "You have gotten so big," his mother said, and she was smiling through her tears. "The last time I held you, you fit in one arm." "You look just like me," his father said with wonder. "Same hair, same stubborn jaw." "Grandma says I have your eyes," Arlo said to his mother. "How is she?" his mother asked, and her voice cracked. "How is my mother?" "She is strong," Arlo said. "She took care of me. She kept me safe. She told me about you." "We never stopped thinking about you," his father said. "Not for a single day." How touching. The voice came from everywhere and nowhere, and it was cold, so cold that the temperature in the chamber dropped even further, and the single pale flame flickered and almost went out. The shadows in the room began to move, swirling and gathering and condensing, until they formed a shape, a tall figure draped in darkness, with eyes that burned like 2 points of cold blue fire. The Shadow King. He was terrifying in a way that went beyond what Arlo could have imagined, because he was not just dark, he was the absence of everything good. Looking at him was like looking at a hole in the world, where hope and warmth and love had been scooped out and replaced with nothing. "Child," the Shadow King said, and his voice dripped with contempt. "They sent a child to challenge me." "Nobody sent me," Arlo said, and he was surprised by how steady his voice was. "I came on my own." "Then you are even more foolish than your parents," the Shadow King said. "They came to my world seeking knowledge, and I gave them knowledge. I showed them the truth, that darkness is stronger than light, and that fear is stronger than love, and that in the end, nothing matters at all." "That is not true," Arlo said. "Is it not?" the Shadow King said, and he moved closer, and his presence was overwhelming, like standing at the edge of a cliff in a howling wind. "Look around you, child. You are in the heart of my domain, surrounded by my darkness. You have no weapons, and no army, and no power. What can you possibly do against me?" And Arlo thought about everything he had been through to get here, the whispering swamp that had tried to break him with his own fears, the glass mountain that had tested his heart, the burning plains that had tried to consume him with fire. And he realized something that the Shadow King would never understand. Every single obstacle had made him stronger, not weaker. The swamp had forced him to face his fears, and in facing them, he had learned they were just whispers with no real power. And the mountain had taught him that his heart was strong enough to change the world around him, and the plains had taught him to trust in others and let them guide him. He was not the same boy who had walked through the forgotten door. "I do not need weapons," Arlo said, and he took a step forward. "And I do not need an army." He thought about his grandmother knitting by the fire, and the light grew inside his chest. He thought about his mother singing in the darkness, never giving up hope, and the light grew brighter. He thought about his father, who had the same messy hair and the same stubborn jaw, and light blazed. He thought about Pip, who had waited by a door for 10 years because of a promise made to a stranger, and the light became blinding. It poured out of him like a sunrise, warm golden light that filled the dark chamber and pushed the shadows back. And the Shadow King screamed, a terrible sound like metal tearing, and he stumbled backward, throwing his arms up to shield his burning blue eyes. "What is this?" the Shadow King howled. "This is what you are afraid of," Arlo said, and he took another step forward, and the light grew even stronger. "This is what happens when someone loves so much that the darkness cannot touch them." The Shadow King tried to fight back. He threw waves of shadow at Arlo, but the light dissolved them before they could reach him, and he tried to summon his hunters, but they melted away like ice in sunlight. And he tried to make the darkness close in, but Arlo's light pushed it back and back and back. "You cannot defeat me," the Shadow King roared, but his voice was smaller now, weaker. "I am eternal. I am the darkness itself. And I am the kid who walked through a swamp of whispers and climbed a mountain of glass and crossed a desert of fire to find his family," Arlo said. "And I am telling you right now that your darkness is nothing compared to what I carry in my heart." The light exploded outward in a wave that shook the entire hollow, and the Shadow King shattered like glass breaking into 1,000 pieces of shadow that scattered and dissolved and disappeared. And the fortress around them began to crack and crumble as the darkness that held it together lost its power. The walls fell away and the ceiling dissolved, and suddenly they were standing in the open air under the purple sky, surrounded by ruins of shadow that were melting like snow in spring. And on the ground where the Shadow King had stood, there was a small silver key that glowed with a light that was half starlight, half shadow, woven together. The key to the forgotten door. Arlo picked it up and held it tight, and then he felt a hand on his shoulder, and turned to find his mother and father standing behind him, with Pip on his father's shoulder, and they were all looking at him with an expression that was part pride and part awe and part overwhelming love. "Let us go home," Arlo said, and the door appeared right there in the middle of the ruins, the same enormous door made of dark wood with strange symbols that glowed blue. And Arlo put the silver key in the lock and turned it, and the door swung open to reveal the forest outside his grandmother's town, with sunlight streaming through the trees. They stepped through together, all of them, and the moment they were on the other side, Arlo heard a familiar voice cry out, and there was his grandmother running through the trees with her too long scarf trailing behind her, and tears streaming down her face. Cried. "My babies," Mabel sobbed, and she threw her arms around all of them at once, and held on like she would never let go. Behind them, the forgotten door slowly closed one final time, and then it faded away, the wood becoming transparent, and then misty, and then gone, and where it had stood, there was nothing but forest and sunlight and the sound of birds singing. Pip was still on Arlo's father's shoulder, and the creature looked up at the blue sky of Arlo's world with wonder in its huge dark eyes. "It is beautiful here," Pip said. "You can stay," Arlo said. "You are family now." And Pip's fur turned the warmest shade of gold Arlo had ever seen. They walked home together through the forest, 5 of them now, instead of 2, and the house that had always seemed too quiet and too empty was suddenly full of noise and laughter, and stories that would take years to tell. That night, Arlo lay in his bed and listened to the sounds of his parents downstairs, talking with his grandmother, and Pip was curled up on his pillow purring softly, and he thought about the journey he had taken, and the darkness he had faced, and the light he had found inside himself. And he smiled, because he was not the boy who had been afraid of what was inside the forest anymore. He was the boy who had walked through it, and come out the other side, carrying everyone he loved. And that was enough. That was everything.